Hey, Sooner football fans. This is your Sooner Football Fans podcast. Today we have Jason Young from the Football Brainiacs talking Trenchwarfare. Jason breaks down the Sooner Lineman in the NFL draft and why Oboe to the Rams is a perfect fit for both. Then we discuss Ben Powers, Drew Somalia, Bobby Evans, Cody Ford, and Creed Humphreys. That's right, the Sooners offensive line. Sooner Football Fans podcast is not associated with the University of Oklahoma, but we do have eligibility left. Boomer. Hey, Sooner football fans. This is your Sooner Football Fans podcast. You got Terry and Rob here. Boomer Rob.
Boomer Terry.
All right, on today's podcast from the Football Brainiacs, who has a segment on their website called Trenchwarfare Breakdown. Trenchwarfare Breakdown. Blah. And we're excited to have him on to talk about the offensive line and some draft picks. And we've got Jason Young. Boomer, Jason.
Hey, Boomer, guys. How you doing?
Fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for asking.
So tell us a little bit about what you do with the Football Brainiacs.
Well, like you guys, I'm kind of obsessed with Sooner football, and I just kind of started about like you did a few years back, where I just started breaking down the offensive line just because I played a little bit of ball and played in college and things, and you always hear fans talking about how it's always the offensive line's fault and different things like that. So, you know, I had to take up for the big guys a little bit, so I started doing the breakdowns, and I'm a self-proclaimed film rat. So when I played, I had to be a little bit smarter than the other guys because I wasn't as athletic. So had to find an edge another way. So just started breaking down film like we used to do it in the film room when I was in college, and started putting that on screenshots and showing people what was going on. And, you know,
and
got hooked up with Brainiacs, and we've been doing that ever since.
But basically you were showing everybody why they were wrong, right?
Well, showing them why they were, yeah, in a way, I guess.
Good answer.
I mean, that's, you know, because it's funny. Used to, you know, my stature doesn't prove it, but, you know, back in my day, a long time ago, I was an offensive lineman. And for years, that's what I watched when I watched a football game on TV. I watched the offensive line. And now I've become more of a, I guess, the fan. And I just watch the game, but every now and then I'll sit there and just, you know, just start poking into what's going on the line, and, you know, the stuff you have on the Brainiacs where you know, draw out the blocking schemes and what's going on. I love that, and I think more fans should look at that stuff, you know, because it does.
I appreciate it.
That's the heart of the game. We, you know, my old ball coach, Coach McMullen, he called us dirt eaters. You know, that's what the offensive and defensive lines are. They're the reason why our running backs and quarterbacks are getting to where they go. So
absolutely.
But so where you said you played a little ball. Where are you from originally? Or did you play?
I grew up about an hour east of Norman in a little bitty town called Bearden. It's a dot on the map. Some maps it's not even on. Played 8-man football in high school there at Butner High School, Cromwell, Oklahoma. And was lucky enough to have decent grades, and I got looked at by a few schools and ended up at Division II Missouri Southern in Joplin, Missouri, from 95 to 2000.
Okay, what position? Obviously, somewhere on the line.
Well, when we played, we were in split back veer, and what we did is we flipped the strong side and weak side. So I actually, you know, depending on the call, could be on either side of the line. I preferred to play on the left because I'm a left-handed guy, but for the most part, you know, it just depended on the call of the call for that play.
Okay. So just before we get anything, what was it like playing 8-man football? You played 8-man. You know, I've watched it on TV. I watched some stuff. Actually, I watched the other day on ESPN. What's the biggest difference, you know, playing it? As far as, you know, it's just watching it. What's the biggest difference in it?
Right. Well, you don't realize it when you're a kid, but, you know, it's a track meet, for one, just because there's 3 less players. And, you know, as we all know, people are prone to miss tackles. So the thing that you cannot do in 8-man football is miss tackles because, like I said, there's 3 less defenders. So the field is a little smaller than what you see on an 11-man, and usually that's in length. The width of it might be a yard or 2 narrower, but not much. So when you have 1 or 2 gaps less to get outside, it gives people a lot more room to run. So if you got kids with athleticism and at lower levels, you don't see great speed all the time. Back when I was in high school, Grandfield down around Lawton and everything else, they had a few guys that were, 4.6, 4.5 guys back then that could just fly, and they dominated people. So it's just you can't miss tackles, and it's a little bit quicker. Really, the only difference is instead of tackles, you have guards, and then you go straight to the tight ends from the guards in the formation if you go double tight.
Yeah. So, but the transition from that into college 11-man, it wasn't difficult for you to do.
Well, the difference was, being from a small town there, all our dads were waiting on us during 2-a-days to take us out in hayfield and put us to work, So
yeah,
when I got to college, we got out of practice and everybody's going back to their apartments and their dorm rooms and taking naps between practice. I'm like, what the heck are you guys doing? And, because I was used to going to work. So the difference was, too, I was used to running a heck of a lot more because the only thing I came off the field for in high school was halftime. Yeah. And, when when I got to college, I was 6'3" and I weighed about 310. And then when I graduated, or when I got, to be a junior or senior, I was 6'5". I'd grown a couple inches. It was about 280, 295, right in that range. So, the difference was that there's not near the running in college that you have in high school. You don't really run sprints. You don't do a lot of that. You just have to. The difference is in practice, you have to learn how to compete at a very high level, and that was the biggest difference because in high school practice, it's not near. You don't really know how to play hard unless you're really taught how to play hard.
Right.
I really don't know how to describe it, and a lot of folks don't get that. A lot of kids in high school think they're really going hard and they're really doing everything they can when they really don't know how to push themselves yet because they haven't been asked to. So, it depends on the level of competition.
Yeah. I remember a couple of years, more than a couple of years ago, but I heard an interview with Rocky Kalmus on one of the sports shows up here. And they were asking him, going from high school, because he was at Jinx, high level high school ball to OU, of course, high level, and then into the pros. And they were like, what's the biggest difference, the biggest jumps? And the one I remember most, he goes, well, coming from college to the NFL, he goes, being in the NFL, he goes, the only way I can describe it is it's like playing football on I-40 because everybody is fast, everybody's strong. It's the elite of the elite. And unless you're ready to compete at that level, it'll eat you up, and that goes along with kind of like what you're saying. We all thought we were super duper athletes and going hard in high school, but when you get into the next level, you realize, okay, my best has got to be better,
Right.
So.
Yeah. The best way I can describe it is, you go from hero to zero.
Yeah.
When like I said, I was 6'3" when I graduated high school and I weighed about 310, When I got recruited, everybody, I was about 250 or 260, but that was back when the Cowboys were winning all these Super Bowls and whatnot, and all their offensive linemen were the size of limousines, so everybody in that little bitty town that didn't know anything about football was telling me I wasn't big enough. You need to gain weight. So everybody's mom and all the cafes and restaurants in town trying to feed me, and I get to college, and my offensive line coach is like, what the hell happened to you? Because I gained like 30 or 40 pounds, and I said, well, everybody's telling me I wasn't big enough, so I lost the weight, and he got down there, but long story short, at 310 when I first got to college, we had a couple of All-Americans on our offensive line, even at Division II, and I had turf burns on my rear end. These are, and that was an eye opener. I could pretty much do whatever I wanted to in high school, and these grown men are just throwing me around like a rag doll.
Yeah.
And but we didn't have anything when I grew up, so I felt like Richard Gere on Officer and the Gentleman. I didn't have any place to go, so I had, a lot of kids just hang it up, but I had to work and I had to find a way to get better and get stronger. And, I did, fortunately. And a lot of it, that's why when we get film on kids or look at somebody for the first time, I don't always like to slam the door, because I remember how far I had to go to be able to play at a high level in Division II, to, some of these kids, you look at them, and a lot of it depends on their work ethic, because you are so much different mentally and physically from when you're 17 until you get, if you redshirt, you're 22, 23 years old when you graduate.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and that's,
so it just depends on the kid.
Yeah, that's the thing with, we've talked about on the podcast, we talked about with, Brandon when he came on was, the, how much earlier they're recruiting these kids now at sophomore and junior. That's a lot of pressure on a kid and his family to start making those decisions and having to, like you said, start now preparing for a higher level, because who you're competing against now is nothing to what you're going to be competing against in, 2 years, just to get on a field. And
absolutely.
It just dumbfounds me, I couldn't imagine. Now, of course, my parents, and all these kids got their parents standing beside them and stuff, but I couldn't imagine having that, having all these schools, courting you, when you're a sophomore and junior in high school. It just we keep getting them younger, which is, I guess good. It gives us fans something to talk about year round for sure. But
sure. Well, there's always that kid who needs to shave in the 8th grade, and some of these kids are those kids that are really developed at an early age.
Yeah.
And these can't miss prospect guys, some of them. I mean, we're looking at kids that are 2020. I was watching film on a kid out of Washington, D.C. the other day. I'm watching sophomore film. I mean, this kid doesn't even really know what he's doing yet. But when he got it all right, when he came off low and he played with good pad level and he played flat back, I mean, he was just destroying people. So, you gotta respect what these coaches do, and they're trying to look through all this stuff and understand these kids aren't very much developed and see the blank canvas that they have to what they want to turn these kids into. But some of them, it's easier to evaluate a running back like a Noah Kane or some of these other guys that, the Sooners are after, that they can just, you cut on the tape and you're like, yeah, that's the guy.
Yeah.
So some positions are a little bit harder to evaluate than others, for sure. But, that's why you see all the support staff getting added too, because coaches don't have time to watch film on everybody that comes along. But you got to get in on a guy, because the kids always remember that first offer.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, with the offensive line and defensive line, I've always felt that they don't get the credit that they deserve, because, I'm an old man. I'm in my 50s. Rob's right behind me. He's not quite as old, but
easy now.
But it used to the aura around a line was just big dumb linemen. And even back in the 80s when I played high school ball, that wasn't the case. I mean, you had to think when you came up there to the line. We had, we run a pro style offense, split, when I say pro style, but, we had, split backs and, tight end. It was pretty basic. But when we came up, the calls, I was the center, the call started from me and worked its way out. And then but the tackle could always counter me. So there was all this chatter in a very short amount of time. You know what I mean? I had to recognize the defense, make my call to the guard, the tackle had to, and then the tackle could go, and then God help us if the quarterback changed the play. He got to check down to something. And that always got me, is that people, big dumb linemen. No, they got to recognize everything in a very short amount of time. And then they got to execute it. And I'm guessing it hasn't changed that much since the 80s, but it seems that way to me, that, they have that short amount of time to know what they're doing. And I think, now the quarterbacks will call out the blocking schemes. I think in the pros, I've seen some stuff on that, but the linemen, they don't get the credit they deserve. I don't think. Rob, do you You were a fullback. You.
Well, I'm from a small town too, Jason, and I had to play line a lot just because I was the biggest kid on the team. But I mean, when I was a senior, we had 17 kids on the team, and 4 of them were freshmen that we had to pull up from the junior high. So we weren't very good. We played Class 2A ball. We should have been at least A ball or even 8-man ball, you know. I think that. For the most part, people do see it that way, Terry, is, you know, all you're doing is just hitting the guy in front of you, and that's just not the case. You know, it's not all that complicated to understand which hole you're blocking out, or, what rushing lane you're going to be in, or if you're going second level, that kind of thing. And I'm sure Jason could probably explain it a little better than we can, but there's a whole lot more to it than just firing off and hitting that guy in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about it, you're already physically the slowest position group on the field. So, I mean, you are.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you've got all these other guys, people they call skill positions. You know, those guys are fast, right? So they have to play fast. And so that's when I was talking about it earlier, you know, watching film, you have to eliminate that moment of indecision because you're already slower than everybody else. So if you're already slower in a race, and then when the gun goes off, you're confused, and then you pause. Now you look really slow, and then the play's done, and you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So I agree 100%. You have to know what you're doing. You have to eliminate all that indecision, and you've got to process things very quickly. And you have to know it, and you have to know what your brothers are doing next to you, because if you don't, and you don't know what they're doing, and if they slant or they twist or they do any of these things, and you got to pick up that other guy and you're not looking at the right things, you're going to screw it up. And if one guy on the line screws it up, then the whole play's dead.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to play as a unit. So, you know, the big dumb linemen, there were, believe me when I say this, there were a couple guys I played with in college. They're dumber than a bag of hammers. But you get next to them and they ask you every play, you know, what am I doing? And you tell them, and they're okay.
Yeah.
You know, there's some guys like that, but there's always a couple of guys that, you know, have to know everybody's job. And, you know, I always was one of those guys. I was always paranoid that I was going to screw something up, you know, so, but I was just that kind of player, way more cerebral, you know, because I knew I wasn't going to be any good if I wasn't a student of the game. So.
Yeah.
But, you know, defensive linemen are going to get a little bit more publicity because, you know, they make tackles, they make sacks, you know, all that type of thing. You know, offensive linemen get credit, but most time it's bad credit, you know, because you get credit for that holding penalty or the false start or something like that, you know. So, you know, yeah, but I think it takes a special kind of person to play that, you know, because the gratitude that you get a lot of times is from the backs, the receivers, the quarterbacks, and their families. You know, those are the people that recognize you. So at the end of the day, you want to do your job and you want to be a warrior. So
yeah. Well, hey, let's get into a little bit of the talk of the draft. This past weekend or weekend before last, you know, Orlando Brown. Obviously, his combine cost him money. You know, because he was, you know, supposed to go in the first round, or that's what everybody was projected, and he dropped down to the third. What was your take on his combine? You know, that they made a big thing about his bench press, which, you know, I have my own opinion on that. The guy's got 7 foot long arms. It's a little bit harder to push,
sure.
You know, lock an elbow out when your arms are 7 foot long than it is when they're 3 foot long. But
right.
What did you take from his his combine effort?
Well, the combine is an open book test. So there's a couple different schools of thought when it comes to it. If you're a nobody from nowhere state, like where I played, you know, you've got to blow people away at the combine to even get them to look at you, even if you even get invited, you know, unless people send scouts to see you at a pro day or something. But for a guy like Orlando Brown, who was, you know, an Outland Trophy finalist, 2-time Big 12 lineman of the year and all that type of thing, you know, it really didn't matter what he did at the combine. Instead of if he goes in there and he blows people away and he gets 32 reps on 225 and nobody's talking about it, he probably goes first round.
Yeah.
Because really, at the end of the day, those general managers have to have justification as to why they're picking this guy. And a good friend of mine used to be the director of pro scouting for the Denver Broncos named Chris Trudeau. And he told me a lot of times that the people that get picked the highest are the ones that have the least things wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, they lay everything out and they look at it and they say, okay, great combine, great tape, great this, great that. And at the end of the day, Orlando, because of his combine performance, he gave people an excuse not to draft him.
Right.
That's what he did. And you can't, as dominant as his performance was on tape, you can't bench 2 1/4, 12 times, or how many ever he got it when he was in Indianapolis at the combine, and be a first round pick. You just can't.
Mm.
And the thing that's disappointing to me is the 225 rep test is something you have to work at. And to me, it's really not about how many times you can bench 225. It's about your work ethic.
Right.
And I think the reason that he may have dropped a few times or a few rounds is because people may have questioned his work ethic. I've never met Orlando. I don't know. From everything that I hear, he's a good kid. Never heard anything bad come out about it in the locker room or anything like that. I think, he's going to be a really great player for Baltimore when it's all said and done, because, you can be a weightlifter or a football player, because I played with guys who could bench the whole damn weight room and they couldn't play dead in the Cowboy.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's. I think the only thing, the bench press. But then I remember watching the stuff on the draft where I guess on one of the skills tests where they're going through the cones, you could hear the coach, I guess, also basically chewed him because he didn't feel like he was putting the effort in. And
right,
and I said all along, I think Rob said it too, he's still going to play pro ball. Look at the tape. I mean, but like you said, if something, for some reason, regardless of what, I don't know that you'd say he didn't put max effort in, but it didn't seem that he did. And he did better at his pro day than he did the combine. So,
well, and that's what's funny about it, because you look at it, the combine and the pro day, I think, were separated by a week or 2 weeks or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he improved. He went from, I think, 12 reps to 18 reps or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when he started working at it, he immediately got better.
Yeah.
I'm one of these guys. I'm always going to be of the mindset that it's about effort. It's way more about attitude than it is aptitude. So I was very disappointed, again, saying that the combine is an open book test. They're going to run the 40. The drills that you're going to do. You're going to do a 225 rep test. And it's just like kids that don't study in college.
Yeah.
You know what's coming. But he didn't do anything about it. So I was disappointed there.
Let me ask you this, Jason, real quick, while we're on this subject. At 6'8", 340 or whatever he was, 350, he's probably never really had to put out a whole lot of effort. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, he's always been probably the biggest, strongest kid around. So, is there any?
I don't know. I think especially at the University of Oklahoma, you're playing guys. Texas had some horses.
Yeah.
You're playing guys against Clemson. You're playing those Georgia guys. He's had to. But football is a different game than the underwear Olympics. You have to practice. You have to practice all those things that you're going to do, or you're not going to be good at them. The disappointing thing, and I think the reason that he dropped, was not the number that he got, but the thing that Terry was talking about, that there were coaches there running the drills that had to get on him about his effort. I think that's what got it, because people at the end of the day, they're going to be like, I'm not going to spend a first round draft pick who's going to just kick back on his laurels and say, I'm, this, that, or the other,
Yeah.
And there's a chance if they think that, regardless of how I feel about it, you feel about it, or anybody, it's what that general manager and the owner thinks about it. If there's a chance that I doubt for any moment that this guy's going to work hard for me, I'm not going to pick him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially not with my first choice.
I honestly, I hadn't thought of it the way that you explained it, that, it's not like he didn't know what he had to do. at the combines. So all if you just put your effort into those skills for the next month or month and a half or 2 weeks, and it did. I mean, I'm a Sooner fan, true and true, but it didn't look like he was putting out much effort at the combine. And, maybe he just was, uncomfortable. I don't know what it was, but, I'm happy for him that he ended up getting drafted. I hate the fact that he's going to the Ravens because I'm a Steelers fan. So I'm not going to get to cheer for him or Baker.
Sure.
So, but the other one I want to talk to you about is Lampkin. Devonta. How do I pronounce it, Rob? Devonta.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, Lampkin. He left early. Ended up. I think he signed. I think he signed a free agency deal. Like maybe it was with the Ravens too. I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me look here. Yeah, he signed a free agent deal. We've talked about it before. I don't want to try to get into anybody's personal life. Obviously, he had reasons for coming out, but did he get bad advice from somebody outside the coaching, outside OU? That said, hey.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. You don't know who's in these kids' ears. You don't know. Devontae's mom's a doctor. So in a lot of cases, these kids are primary breadwinners for their families, and in Devontae's case, that wasn't the case.
Right.
So a lot of these kids are pressured financially. To go and try to make money because they think that they're going to get rich. For Devontae, I don't know why he left. He's somebody to me. I thought that, I believe he was just a sophomore this last year. I thought he needed a year or two more, just because I was really thinking he was going to have a much better game against Georgia than what he did.
Right.
I really thought that, how he had performed early in the year, that we're going to see some of that. But I don't remember him making the play really against Georgia. And I don't know. He's a big guy. I mean, he's along the lines of a Jordan Phillips. He would show up and then he would vanish. I mean, the kid could be dominant when he wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, that's, again, when people think that, if you get picked in the draft, that if you go in the 7th round, that you're not any good. And that's what's ironic about it.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about the top, I think it's 255 picks, and regardless of what recruiting service is out there, whether it's Rivals has the 250 and the 100, you got ESPN has the 300, you have, all this, that, and the other, but most of the time they only really group the top 250 kids and rank them individually that way. So when you're talking about drafting the top 250 people in the world that are eligible to be drafted that year. And again, going back to my earlier point, if there's any question at all about this guy's going to show up every day, every down, as one of my coaches used to say, every play, every day. If that guy's going to show up every play, every day, and give you the most effort, I'm going to pick a guy that's going to show up, because you look back since 99, 2000, the New England Patriots have been at the top of the NFL. And does anybody in the world know any names on that team besides Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski?
Nope.
Nobody knows. It could be a bunch of Irish guys from the pub in Boston. Nobody knows.
Right.
I mean, it's just Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski. But what they do is they get guys that are where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there, how they're supposed to be there. And I think that in and of itself is a talent that you can't really create a drill for.
Good point. Yeah, because I heard something on when they were talking about the draft with the Patriots, is that they will trade away good players that people are like, what are they doing trading this guy, because they're wanting to fill it with somebody else that they believe is going to, whereas the guy I heard talking about it, that Belichick knows will replace him and be better. That's their whole scheme. They have constantly traded off great talent, but like you said, who is it? But then it's filled and you don't see the void, and it may even be a little bit better.
And it's funny you mentioned that. I watch everything about football I can get my hands on, and I always like the psychology of the game. And there's a Football Life. It's on the NFL Network, and they do the documentaries of the players and the coaches. Well, they did one on Belichick, and I don't even know the receiver's name that plays for him now. I think Julian Edelman, maybe.
Yeah.
It's funny because they're showing Bill Belichick standing on the sideline talking to Wes Welker, and Julian Edelman in a preseason game ran a kickback for a touchdown, and Belichick is standing there next to Welker, and they're laughing and joking. It's preseason. It's pretty casual. And Belichick jokingly looks at Wes Welker and he says, "Well, there goes your replacement," just jokingly.
Yeah.
And Welker looked at him, and I don't know if it was just a slip or what, but he looked at him and said, "He can have it." And you should have seen the look and the expression. The blood just ran out of Belichick's face.
I saw that when
it was assassin time, and it was profound, and they didn't even hit on it there, but I saw it, and I was like, man, and here it is, like a year later or even that year, Welker's gone.
Yeah.
Guess who's in there?
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that one, and I saw the same thing that you did. It was all kind of, ha-ha, and until he said, he can have it. And the whole, Belichick's whole demeanor changed immediately. And I was surprised that they didn't carry on with that a little bit, but on that one. But as much as I don't like the Patriots, you got to give him credit. He's doing an amazing job with those guys winning. Yeah. But
going back to Devontae Lampkin just a moment, some of these kids leave for the money, but getting a bachelor's degree anywhere, let alone University of Oklahoma, is not a walk in the park.
No.
And not everybody's cut out for school. So he, if he's struggling in school and he knows he's not going to be passing, he's not going to be playing, might as well go.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's the case. I'm just saying that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's the Pat Jones. Every now and then listen to him on the radio up here, and he said he used to meet guys, and when he was recruiting them, and he'd just tell they weren't college material, and I think he said I just tell him, son, college is not for you. The world needs ditch diggers, and there ain't nothing wrong with being a ditch digger.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
yeah, because like Rob said, getting through the school, part of it is it's not especially at an institution like Oklahoma, it's not an easy task. Now, okay, on the what I think was the steal of the draft was Obo, and I'm never ever going to try to pronounce his last name. I'm just going to call him Obo for the rest of my life. Going to the Rams, and I think I watching the draft, I was down there, but then watching the stuff afterwards, Phillips was just thrilled to death that he was still there and they got him. For the defense. What do you think? You think that's the steal, like a lot of people have said?
I think it's just I don't know if it's a steal so much as it is. It's the perfect marriage between a coach and a player.
Right.
Because, I read the article that the measurables between Von Miller and Obo, I think the only difference was that Obo had, his arms were a couple inches longer. But everything else from a combine standpoint, and was pretty much dead on: height, weight, bench press, all that kind of stuff. I was in the school of thought that Obo needed to be up around the line rushing the passer because the kid was dominant whenever Mike Stoops turned him loose and let him go after people.
Yeah.
I think just because of the scheme, I don't think we truly saw as Sooner fans what he's capable of.
Because they kept dropping him back in coverage. Oh,
yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
You know how many times we
you.
screamed at the TV? What is he doing? Putting him in coverage.
Oh my God, it makes no sense, especially when you've got, rookie quarterbacks all over the freaking league, and you're thinking to yourself going into the game, man, you got to heat this guy up.
Yeah.
You heat him up, they're going to make mistakes, and then, hey, let's drop 8 and give him, time to write a damn thesis in the backfield. And it's, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So, but you look at Wade Phillips, he knows how to use those guys. And you look at what he did with a guy like Von Miller, and you do look at historically what he's done with those guys. I think, if Obo gets in there and he works, and he does what he's supposed to do, I think he could be a guy that they got, I think he could be the steal in the draft. Because I think the key to a good coach is knowing how to use their players, knowing how to, you were talking earlier about the big dumb linemen. I think the great coaches know how to simplify the game so they don't make their players think.
Right.
And I think that Phillips can do that with him. Not that Obo needs it. From what I hear, he's a pretty smart guy, but, I think that he knows how to do that with those guys, and I think it's great from a defensive standpoint. I think he's going to be a terror out there in LA. Yeah.
And, you talked about earlier, the work ethic. I mean, there's nobody that I watched, when he was doing what he did best, in my, in our, obviously our opinion, which is rushing, rushing the passer. The Texas game, this past year, I always go back to when talking about Obo, because you see the picture of him after the game, and he is, he doesn't have dirt, he has mud on him, and it was a hot day because the dirt he got on him because of all the sweat turned to mud, and he fought through time after time of horse collar grabs, and they were holding him that whole second half, and he never once took a play off. Every play that he was going back there after the shorthorn quarterback, he had his ears pinned back. And the only time I ever saw him not doing that is when they dropped him back in coverage, because I don't think he was, at all comfortable doing that. And so you saw a different, not effort, but we've talked about it already. He wasn't comfortable being there, so he was thinking about what he was doing more than reacting. Just my opinion.
Exactly.
But
I agree with you 100%, because you look at, how they've recruited in the last few years with a guy like Addison Gums or Mark Jackson and Kajakri Daly, all these kids that are premier pass rushers by everybody's opinion coming out of high school. And you see coaches like Saban and some of these other coaches across the college landscape where they'll get a premier talent and they find out what that kid does really, really well and says, just go do that.
Yeah. That's all you have to do.
And
just turn him loose.
What I want you to do.
Yeah, just turn him loose.
It's like Rob's favorite player from that college down in Lafayette, Louisiana. Rob, right?
Bobby Boucher.
There he is. Yeah. Bobby Boucher.
Find the one thing he does, that he can do, and or the one thing that motivates him. Boom, there you go. You got Bobby Boucher going. So,
exactly. And your game was Texas. For me, it was Ohio State.
Really?
You look at what he did to those NFL tackles. That he wore those guys out. But you look at, it's almost like Mike Stoops got a damn case of amnesia or something, because after that, I'm thinking, this is me and, Kay and some of the other guys on the side are talking about that game. And, if this is how they're going to play the rest of the year, they're going to be dominant.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't play that same aggressive style of defense the rest of the year.
I know it.
Yeah, it was, I think the next game, wasn't the next game after Ohio State, Baylor? Or it was pretty close. Yeah, and it was like, what the hell? What where is the, like you said, the aggressive, the it was like it wasn't even the same guys out there, or not the same. It was just a completely different scheme, and it was like that the rest of the year to me, up until towards the end they kind of changed it up. But it looked like a completely different unit and a completely different scheme that they were wanting to do after the Ohio State game. It was like, okay, we beat them doing this. And that's why I fully believed that we were just going to kill Georgia. And we should have, because the amount of points we scored, I said, we're going to go back and we're going to do the same thing we did to Ohio State. Stoops has he's got those style of offenses numbers. And just didn't do it. And I don't know why, or what gets in his head. If anybody can ever figure that out, they need to let us know. So, he's going to give me a stroke one of these days at a game. So,
yeah, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth sometimes. But for the life of me, you can't tell me that the talent discrepancy or talent disparity is that wide, the gap is that wide between Georgia's offensive line and Oklahoma's front seven.
No.
Talent for talent, you can't tell me that. It's
and
I don't know.
They were gashing us that second half. It was
awful.
Yeah.
And you don't expect to see that. But I'm with you. I thought it would be much different. But I'm excited about what Bob Diaco is going to come in and hopefully be another set of eyes and voice there, this year. I'm hoping that they do some things that are more aggressive. You hear them talking about one gap and a little bit more and letting those defensive tackles get upfield a little bit more. A guy like Marquise Overton, who could be a terror if they just turn him loose and let him get upfield. Hopefully they let him do that.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get into last little topic here, the offensive line for Oklahoma. Last year, they were considered one of the best, if not the best, offensive lines in the country. Of course, we lose Brown. What do you look at as far as what we got coming back with our offensive line? Who stands out with you?
Well, you've got. For the most part, to me, you got 4 starters coming back. You got Bobby Evans, you got Ben Powers, you got Drew Samia, and, you got Cody Ford. Because Cody, in my opinion, was on track to be the best offensive lineman Oklahoma had before he got hurt against Ohio State at home 2 years ago. He was going to be dominant at guard, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And during practice, they put him out at tackle, but that's what Coach Bedenbaugh does, and I've written about this a few times. Coach Bedenbaugh recruits versatility so that he can put the best unit on the field. And I say the best unit, not meaning the quote-unquote best talent, not taking anything away from anybody, but he's going to put the best unit on the field.
Right.
And that might mean that Cody Ford is playing left tackle this year, because if he beats these other guys out, then he deserves that. Because you think about who's coming in from a tackle standpoint. You've got Darrell Simpson coming out of Dallas. You've got Bray Walker, who is all world everything. Everybody thinks he's just going to walk on campus and become the next great one.
Yeah.
And heck, you got the other kid that came in out of JUCO.
Creed Humphreys? Is that Creed Humphreys?
No, Creed Humphreys is probably, in my opinion, he's going to be pushing Jonathan Alvarez for the center spot.
Okay.
Because Eric Wren left.
Right.
But Tremont Moore, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Tremont Moore could come in. They're talking about using him a little bit defensively, but I think Coach Bedenbaugh is a savant, and he is very good at knowing how to motivate people. And what I mean by that is Cody Ford, like I said, he's a guy he probably knows everybody's job. He can play anywhere on the line. And you look at how he plugged Bronson Irwin in against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl 2 years ago, right tackle. Because what he does is he recruits guys that are athletic enough to play that position. You don't have to be the most athletic guy. And you saw Georgia do it this year, and they put Isaiah Wynn, guy at 6'2", out at left tackle. And he was great. He was a first-round draft pick. I don't know if he's going to play tackle in the NFL. I doubt he does. He'd probably be a guard because he's a little too short. But Beatonbow really does that well. He gets guys that are athletic enough that played tackle in high school, and he puts them at guard and center. And so that way, in case of injury or in case of motivation or any of those things, he can stick them out at tackle to keep these younger kids hungry and healthy, because you get a guy like Eric Swenson or, Adrian Ely, who's already on campus, who by all intents and purposes are great players in and of themselves. If you let those guys get comfortable at all and think I'm just the next guy up and I don't have anybody to push me, they're going to get lazy, because that's what fat guys do. Come on, let's admit it. Right?
Yep.
So, and the way that you motivate big guys is you make them think they're going to lose their job. And I think it's brilliant, because that was kind of a shot across the bow to everybody on the front, that I'm going to put the guy out there I think that's going to be the one that I can count on the most as an offensive line coach. And Cody Ford is one of those guys. Because you look at it, you got Drew Samia, who's going to be a 4-year starter. I really doubt that anybody's going to unseat him. You've got Ben Powers, who is, he's probably going to be a pretty good draft pick. I wouldn't say he's a first rounder by any means, but he's going to get drafted unless he gets hurt. And then you got Bobby Evans. Most people thought that he played better than Orlando Brown last year, and he's more athletic, a little bit smoother, but he doesn't have the size. So I honestly thought they'd kick him out for left tackle, but they didn't. But, Beatonbow still might. He may have just not wanted to show that in the spring.
Yeah.
So Jonathan Alvarez, you look at him, and as a redshirt freshman, he was the guy that started against Clemson, in the Orange Bowl.
Right.
So Eric Wren comes in as a walk-on and beats him out. So realistically, you got 5 guys that you could be going left to right with Cody Ford, Ben Powers, Jonathan Alvarez, Drew Samia, and, Bobby Evans. You could have 5 guys up front that everybody knows their name because they've been around a long time. But you got a guy like Creed Humphrey that you mentioned that could come in at center, because from what I understand, he caught on to the playbook and all those things. He's probably the first jumbo center that Beatonbow's had, because he's probably an inch or two taller and bigger than what Wren and Alvarez are. Probably a little bit, a lot stronger, because you had Gabe Eichert was there, was a great athlete, but, was a converted tight end. So he never had to, he's not a monster like what Creed Humphrey is. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different things that Beatonbow can do. And again, the thing that you can't have with the offensive line is a whole lot of moving parts. And so I think that you're going to see Bobby Evans, you're going to see Drew Samia, and you're going to see Ben Powers, but those other 2 spots, and I don't know what those spots are going to be,
Right.
He might bump Bobby Evans over and put somebody at right. It's all going to come down to who plays the best and how well that unit works together.
Well, and I like what you said, his thought of it's not necessarily that, it's the best, or that he puts the best group out there. Because like we were talking about earlier, the communication and offensive line and how they react with each other is key. If they don't, it's why some fans talked about the spring game that the line didn't look very good and this and that. It's like, well, it was like throwing dice is who they put out there. You know what I mean? It wasn't like they built these these 2 teams to. Let's face it, the spring game was for us. It wasn't, they did their evaluations, but, the format and everything, but you couldn't take anything from that, because you've got guys that probably don't work all the time together. And like you said, like we were talking about with a unit, you probably got a right guard and a right tackle that may work with each other once a week. You know what I mean? And, in the spring game, they put them out there and the communication's not there. But, I like that, I wasn't aware of that, that he looks at that unit as more as the guys that work well together and the best unit instead of the best, maybe individual player. And hope, if that individual can't fit into that other best of the units, then he's going to be the guys on the outside.
Well, absolutely. And that when you look at it from the most basic of terms, and you understand that Bill Beatonbow is a dad, he's a husband, he's a breadwinner for his family. And the decisions that he makes as far as who he puts on the field determines his ability to provide for his family.
Yeah.
So for him, there has to be a level of trust, knowing that those guys are going to be where they're supposed to be and do what they're supposed to do. And who's going to do that the most? And he does very well at setting that expectation and keeping those seats hot and keeping people motivated. So, and I think some of that's starting to bleed over. You saw it in the secondary this year, with the two young corners coming in and replacing the JT and Motley there early.
Yeah.
And I think it's starting to bleed over a little bit into the defensive line. And but Beadenbow's great. And he's a master at that kind of thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see who trots out there in week one. And depending on how well the offensive line works, you go back a couple of years ago in the Texas game when Oklahoma lost that Texas game, and then come back the next week, you got Drew Samia starting, St. John was out, Alvarez was in, they moved some guys around, and then all of a sudden the offensive line clicked the rest of the year. I mean, you go and have underwear Olympics like we just did with the Combine, and those players might look better doing those events than the kids he put on the field, but those kids were able to work together better. And that's what you ultimately have to have.
Yeah, and I think, like what you just said too, it's bleeding over into the other. I think it's kind of always been that way with the running back position, but I can't think of his name, but he just, the running back that transferred this year and fumbled against Ohio State.
Oh, Abdul Adams?
Yeah. Fumbled, he had a few problems in the earlier games. He fumbled, against Ohio State. You didn't see him the rest of the game and hardly the rest of the year, and
it was disappointing to me because, he goes from Baylor the next week and goes for 99 yards.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, in my opinion, the most explosive back that Oklahoma had on the field. And if he could have held on to the ball, you would have had a three-headed monster with him and Trey Sermon and Rodney Anderson.
Yeah.
Because early on in the season, I had some old teammates. We were texting back and forth because we're all Sooner fans. I was not a Rodney Anderson fan in the early going. I was all about Abdul Adams, and he came around the second half of the year. So I agree with you 100%. The way you motivate kids is by threat of playing time or lack thereof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we were talking about on our last podcast with a fan. He was concerned. One of his thoughts was, hey, all these quarterbacks were, bringing into Oklahoma, we're going to have an overflow. And then my thought is, when you have you've got this many 4- and 5-star athletes. These are the alpha males. They're going to come in to compete, and that high a competition level on the practice field, regardless of who ends up being out there, is going to put a better product out there than what we've had in a long time. And
I agree.
Yeah, that we're getting, we can sit back and worry about, it was Brandon on our podcast that said, don't get worried about one of these kids decommitting because there is a barn load of them behind them just waiting for their chance to get an offer from Oklahoma that Oklahoma may not have offered them yet. So it's a good problem to have.
Scary. Yeah, and that's what's scary about what Lincoln Riley is doing is, I think we're in our 5th year now with the Brainiacs, and we haven't seen the level of recruiting like what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be a couple that are coming up here that are really going to turn some heads. And you don't see that. We haven't seen that because the old attitude with Stoops was we're going to win with or without you.
Yeah.
But then when you get against a USC in 2005 with the juggernaut that they had and some different things, he was great at developing talent and great with getting a lot out of everybody he had. But he never recruited at the level of what Riley's doing now.
Right.
Now, whether Riley can do that for 18 years like Stoops did, we'll see. But if he continues to be able to bring in the talent and put them in position like he did this last year, and even the year before when Stoops was a coach, and have that productivity, and if he can get somebody to call a damn defense, You know,
Oh yeah, yeah,
that game against Georgia, it should have been 31-6 at halftime.
right.
It should have been over with. You know, I mean, you're talking about if we roll out a defense, you know, and you know all the ifs and buts and cherries and nuts and all that kind of thing. But you think of it, the national championship game's blowout.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and we're talking
You
about
know,
polishing our trophy right now, rather than them Alabama.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. You know, well, I'm not going to say unfortunately because nobody, you know, we've got you hear all the fans talk about it. You know, throw out, you know, fire Mike Stoops and this and that. They're never going to fire Mike Stoops. Okay, Mike Stoops might step down. You know, because it's highly recommended that he step down. But you know, as respected as he has been in college football as a defensive coordinator, I don't know where that has gone. You know what I mean? The demeanor, the swag that our defenses used to have. Probably a little bit too much swag. You know, like you said, back in the 2005 era, Oklahoma got to where they kind of played like if they're going to toss their helmet out on the football field and it's going to roll out there and they're going to see OU on it and they're going to run. That's how I felt as a fan. Was we're not preparing. We're thinking everybody's going to be scared to play us, but you know, anymore it's not. They're scared of our offense, but they're sitting there going, "Hey, you know, this defense, you know, we can put seems like we can put a high school team out there and that could score 21 points on our defense last year." And,
well, and you look at it, you know, we were talking about it earlier. You've got all these offenses in the Big 12 are based on timing,
right?
You know, and Super K and I talk about this all the time. How when you get in the bowl season and you get, you know, in playoffs and things like that, what happens is those defenses force you to throw into tighter windows, and that's why you see Big 12 offenses, they aren't as productive in the bowl games. So, to me, I don't understand why you don't play press coverage on the outside and force these guys to get off their timing, because these quarterbacks are conditioned, whether it's 7-on-7 or the high schools, because all of them play in Texas high school in the Big 12. Everything's timing. Three steps and drop it. And you never give your defensive line, your pass rush, time to get home on the pass rush. And if you just cause them, give them a couple of more seconds to get home, there's no telling how many sacks you can get, and forcing these guys to throw into tight windows. Because not everybody back there, you know, yeah. So, well, for the life of me, I can't understand it.
Yeah, Rob, what was it you said the other day? You wish that that Mike would answer those questions as to why he's 10 yards off the field, you know, off the.
Well, yeah, I mean, we, you know, as football people, I mean, I played, you played, Terry played. We understand that certain sets require certain defensive sets, and some of the way they come out sparks how we're going to play against them. And so to keep Obo in a coverage type set, you know, we've got to do things like that. And so, you know, Mike has taken a lot of heat for some of the defenses, you know, some of the schemes that we've been in. And really, if he would just come out and say, listen, we have to get in these sets based on the offensive scheme that they're running against us, then, you know, that would go a long way with us. But, you know, just fans sitting back saying, why are you playing these guys with such a cushion? They're hitting them on 5-yard slants. They're getting 10 yards after the catch, and they're just moving down the field 10 plays at a time, you know. And I would just like Mike to come out and say, yeah, you know, based on the offensive set that they're in, we have to be in this defensive set, or you know, that would help.
Or I don't trust so-and-so to be in a press coverage against so-and-so. It's just it's driving it's driving me insane, and Rob too. And
well, and you know, that was the thing that was admirable about Stoops, and I think maybe Mike to a degree does the same thing, where he's never going to call a player out in public, and I get that, you know, and that's admirable. But at the same time, you have to let the kids become, like you said, they're alpha males. You have to let that locker room regulate itself.
Yeah.
And before long, if you let those kids play on the outside and you challenge them and you say, okay, you can't get beat deep, because let's face it, it's death by 1,000 cuts if you're playing 10 yards off.
Yeah.
You know, they're gonna go down the field anyway. Challenge those guys.
Yeah.
And then what's going to happen is they're going to challenge their teammates, and one of two things is going to happen. somebody's going to get into a fight in the locker room and it's going to get fixed, or it's not. But either way, you put more ownership on the players because these kids want to be challenged. And the MO has been out in the last few years, like you said, whether you're playing Oklahoma and people are licking their chops, or if you're a recruit coming in, you know, you're not going to get that exposure because they don't challenge you defensively. You know, I mean, what defensive back wants to come in and play 10 yards off?
No. None.
Right.
Yeah. You know, and like I say, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, and especially when you brought up the timing, you know, most Big 12 offenses are timing, you know, do something to disrupt that timing. And,
right.
you know,
especially when you got an oboe.
Yeah.
You know, oh my God, that kid could have had 20 sacks.
Yeah.
Turn him loose. I
mean, to sit back and watch that Baylor game last year, and you know, still the one thing I could not stand, the worst thing that I saw last year was the 99-yard drive that Iowa State put on us on our home field. You know, we had that little zone read fumble, and they just dominated our defense, Iowa State, and then we couldn't stop them the rest of the day. You know, we gave them that confidence. You know, I mean,
with a linebacker at quarterback.
Yeah, with a linebacker. And you know, it just made no sense that the whole it was like we said, it wasn't there wasn't even the same scheme or the same what's the word I'm looking for, intensity that they had at the beginning of the year against Ohio State. And
right,
yeah, but we could go on about this for days on end. But, you know, Jason, we really appreciate you coming on. I hope you had a good time. We certainly did. We're now smarter for having you on.
Well, I hope you're not smarter because of what I said.
Well, we are a little bit, but
there you go.
Yeah, but you know, hope you'll come on again with us.
For sure.
But anytime, just, you know, you got my number now. Just, you know, give me a holler and we'll do it again. But once again, we appreciate it, and we'll see all you Sooner fans later. Boomer Rob.
Boomer Terry.
Boomer Jason.
All right, guys. Thank you.
All right, Sooner football fans, go to the Football Brainiacs. Check out all the guys' stuff, but especially check out Jason's stuff. Trenchwarfare. He draws diagrams out, shows the plays, shows the blocking schemes, what they were supposed to do, maybe what they didn't do. But it's a good place to find some really good stuff. Thanks for listening to the Sooner Football Fans Podcast. If you want to be on the podcast and talk Sooner football with us, go to www.soonerfootballfans.com. Click on the How to Be on the Podcast tab, fill out the form, and we'll get you on. Boomer.